Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality disease-free years as possible. I wanted to wish everybody a happy Memorial Day this weekend, and for all of you men and women who have served in armed forces, thank you very much. And for all of the current people serving, I think that as Americans, it's definitely a weekend to certainly pray and feel for them and their families as they continue to protect our country. So happy Memorial Day to the fallen soldiers and the current soldiers out there and all who have served in the military. It is such an interesting, I'm a history buff, and when I watch history shows and you see looking on various TV shows what these men and women did for our freedom, it's certainly not to be taken lightly. Republican, Democrat, I really don't get involved in any of that stuff. It's certainly a day of reflection. So as we continue our program on change, transformation, and setting real expectations of ourselves, we're taking apart a very complicated subject matter, which is your brain. And last week we went over the fact that this 3-pound structure that sits between your ears, which is the most amazing miracle in the universe, which you possess. You have one of them. You may not be thinking about it a lot, but it requires maintenance, just like your car does, just like your clothes do. Our brains require a great deal of maintenance. And we went over last week, we talked about 10 principles, and the 10 principles that Dr. Amen has outlined in his book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Body. As I spend each week with you talking about behavioral change and also environmental impact of our food supply, the stress of our country, and the poor exercise habits of people, which is contributing to the 78% of all illness is chronic in nature. And a great percentage of that, greater than 90% of that, is man-made. We've done it to ourselves. So if we don't start thinking about change, or let's put it in another perspective, we have to think about change with our brain first. So the 10 principles that I shared with you last week, and we went over last week in our discussion, creating a personal brain management program for yourself. The 10 principles to change your brain, and the brain is the most complex organ in the universe, so we must respect it. We talked about protecting it as well, and I want to start this show off with the fact that, and I say this week in and week out, we are all designed differently. Our personal design in the way our body, that includes our heart, our lungs, our arms, our legs, our spleen, our brain, yes, we all have them, but they function differently. So this is bioindividuality. All of us are different. All of us need to understand that what works for Sally or Jane or Bob or Frank may not work for me. And so this part of the series that I'm doing is about changing your brain will change your weight. Now, weight is something I seldom talk about because I'm not really overly concerned about what you weigh on a scale. I'm concerned about your body composition. That means how much percent body fat versus water versus muscle mass you are versus bone density. These are the types of things that make up your gross weight. But we are going to talk about, if we're going to make behavioral change, how it starts with changing your brain chemistry and looking at the actual design, God's design, the chemistry that he put in our brain. Because if we talk about using your brain, right, to increase what's called willpower, that means we need to calm the urges. Where do those urges come from? So that these urges and these cravings can prevent us from achieving our goals. So in order to take a look at willpower and craving, some people are more predisposed than others with having less of a willpower or have greater cravings, or some of us have more addictive personalities than others. Once again, it's not one shoe size fits all. Now remember Luke 137. For with God nothing is impossible. And also, that's the premise of my show. We must look at God's design, not man's design, to take apart human anatomy and physiology. Since he designed us, we're all designed a little bit differently. And understanding that we're designed a little bit differently is a good thing. Okay, it would be a pretty boring world if we're all carbon copies of each other. So that means that the actual circuitry in our brain and self-control is a very important step in understanding and mastering brain chemistry and body composition. So there are certain centers in your brain. Your brain is not just one structure. It's made up of centers. And they're responsible for things like focus, judgment, your impulse control, for instance, which is in the frontal or what's called the pre-frontal cortex. That's the front of your brain, the way our bodies react to impulses. So there is also part of a brain that is responsible for pleasure, for motivation, okay? Passion, for instance. These are all behaviors that God gives us. Our certain emotional memory centers are behaviors as well. So I'm going to just list a few chemicals that maybe you've heard about. Dopamine, serotonin, GABA, G-A-B-A, and also things called endorphins. These are 4 very important brain chemicals that are responsible for cravings and willpower. So, for instance, dopamine is motivation, drive. It's actually a stimulant, whereas serotonin creates more of a happiness, anti-worrying, and a calming effect. That's why serotonin many times we use prior to bedtime for people who can't sleep. GABA is also calming and relaxing, once again used many times prior to sleep, like tryptophan, which is an amino acid. That also works well. You may have heard someone say, take the tryptophan is in warm milk, and they're right. When you heat up cow's milk, it releases more tryptophan. Tryptophan is also found in things like turkey breast. Now, that's for instance what's called an amino acid. We're talking about brain chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and something called endorphins. Pleasure and pain killing. So when we have a car accident, this week I had a patient come in, a patient of mine, long-term patient, who had a car accident. And she said to me, Doc, I didn't feel anything for the first 48 hours. I refused to go to the hospital. I told the police officers that I was okay. And I said, let me guess, right after 2 days, you woke up and you couldn't move or you were in pain? She goes, yeah, how did you know? And I said, it was the endorphins. Your body released these natural painkillers at the time of trauma or the time of stress. So now that I ran through dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and endorphins, I want to bring up a phone call I got last week from my sister Sharon, who is a very hardworking professional at Verizon. Very smart. She got all the brains in the family, her and my brother. And basically, she said to me, when are you going to talk about stress and the impact stress plays on those of us who are being driven at work, working 60, 70 hours a week? And I said, well, it's coming. But the precursor to that, before we get into the weeks, and I will get into brain chemistry and how stress directly affects our brain chemistry, you now know there are 4 chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and endorphins. And your body secretes these chemicals. I might make more dopamine than you do. You might make more GABA than I do. We're all genetically different. We're all designed differently. So once again, what those 4 chemicals do will impact my behavior. They're going to make me feel a certain way. So when these chemicals in the brain are in balance, we can be focused and goal-oriented, have control over our cravings. We could walk away from that extra piece of cake. We could walk away from the french fries. When these chemicals and brain areas are troubled, we get off track and typically do serious damage to ourselves. We make bad decisions because as the prefrontal cortex, which gives us focus, judgment, and impulse control, okay, and other areas of the brain are responsible for pleasure, motivation, okay, and these chemicals are all working in one unison, and you're not thinking about any of this. You can't control this. This is happening inside of you. If we go into chemical imbalance, then we start making poor decisions. We then make behavioral change based upon the chemistry that we were designed with in our brain. So, for instance, let's say the prefrontal cortex has low activity. Let's say we had some head trauma, or we haven't been sleeping well. For my moms and dads out there with young children, you can understand this. Let's say we had persistent drug use or alcohol use. What's going to happen is you're going to be more likely to have impulse control problems. That means that when you are supervising yourself, you will have poor self-supervision. Now, even though your goal might be to stop smoking, for instance, or maintaining a healthy weight, you will lack the willpower because the front part of your brain is on this haywire response. It's not acting regularly. So that's the balance of brain chemistry, that our willpower, our decision making, which maybe you never really thought about before, your decision making is going to be impacted directly with the areas of the brain and how these chemicals, like I shared with you, dopamine, right, and GABA and such, are in balance. And when we go out of balance, that's when the cortex goes a little haywire. So once again, we want to look at things like good quality sleep, any type of brain trauma, or even ADD, for instance. If we have unhealthy blood sugar, this is critical to brain power. I don't know if you have someone in your life who is older or who is a type 2 diabetic. Many times type 2 diabetics will start to hallucinate or see things because of the imbalance of sugar in their body, which causes their brain chemistry to go a bit haywire. Okay, so these self-control features are built into us, and it's our job to maintain them. Exercise, by the way, is an excellent modality to be used for healthy brain chemistry. Prayer is, numerous studies have found that prayer or meditation upon God helps boost activity and blood flow directly to the prefrontal cortex. You don't think God knew what he was doing when he told us to pray? Think again. Okay, so here we are. We have to have a very focused written goal program for our life. Remember, that's a health journal. We want to make sure that prefrontal cortex is involved, and it is involved in planning and forethought. So we need to stimulate the prefrontal cortex by constantly engaging it in thought and planning. So this is a very good thing for us to do. Get a piece of paper out, take out your health journal, and you're going to write down specific goals about your relationships, your health, your work, even money. Okay, you want to write your goals down so that prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning and forethought, is now engaged. You're exercising that part of your brain. You're getting plenty of sleep. You're balancing blood sugar. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how important balancing blood sugar is so that these chemicals in your brain are working at their optimal potential. We want the chemicals in your brain, along with the parts of your brain, to be working their optimal potential. Why is that? So that you don't make bad decisions. See how God has made us? Because if we start making bad decisions, this is how, for instance, compulsive overeating happens, or impulsive overeating. Okay, we also have a category called impulsive compulsive overeating. We have emotional overeating. We have anxious overeaters. We have adrenaline overload overeaters. Okay, so when we stimulate the brain, like my sister Sharon was talking about, with stress, which causes an imbalance of brain chemistry, our behavior will change. Isn't that so cool? See the way God designed us? He designed us to have balance in our life. And the balance allows this self-regulating miracle called the human brain, which is 3 pounds and sits between your ears, to self-regulate itself. And it requires our help. We cannot overstimulate it with things like caffeine, nicotine, Cocaine, for instance, has the same effect on the brain when they do it on certain studies as sugar does. Sugar is so impactful on brain chemistry. So when you take a look, when we take a look at like weight loss programs, why do they have poor results? Do you know most named weight loss programs have poor results? Because they're searching for the next idea. People are searching for the next quick fix. If you notice, my show is not about giving you just the answers. We're into talking about the problem. So you're better equipped at making better decisions. The whole problem, or the whole notion with weight management, is that one treatment, one program, one method that is advertised works for everyone. It's not based upon your brain imaging, for instance, or your brain management system. That's why I call it your personal brain management system. Okay, there's not a single path for everyone. That is absolutely ridiculous when it comes to healthcare. So as I conclude today's show, and we've really taken apart brain chemistry today in making better behavioral decisions, we want to get plenty of rest. We want to hydrate ourselves, and we want to, this goes back to my sister Sharon, take a nap. Taking a 10-15 minute nap in the middle of the day or throughout your day will revitalize your brain. It will rejuvenate your brain. Also, making sure that we're eating good foods, smaller meals, so we're supplying our brain with healthy sugars throughout our days so we do not fall into hypoglycemia. Balancing that blood chemistry so that we're balancing brain chemistry. We're establishing a personal brain management program for you. Do puzzles for that prefrontal cortex. Guys, you've been listening to me, Dr. James Proodian, of the By Design radio program. Thank you for joining me this week. Please go to ProodianHealthcare.com or to drproodian.com and please become a blog member. If you'd like me to speak at your church, the By Design Ministry is now on the road. I'm very happy to announce, and we are doing churches throughout New Jersey, about 15 of them this year, and I hope to see you at one of my events. God bless you and have a happy Memorial Day.